Good morning, everyone. That was very, very interesting yesterday that the narrative on Ukraine is beginning to collapse. So there was a report in the New York Times that said this. It had the headline, "Intelligence suggests pro-Ukrainian group sabotaged pipelines," US officials say. Now, this is referring to the terrorist attack on the Nord Stream pipelines underneath the Baltic Sea on the 26th of September last year in 2022, where these were these big pipelines, as you probably know, that piped Russian gas to Germany. So Germany and countries connected to the pipelines could get cheap Russian gas and therefore keep the lights on and keep their industry going. Those were blown up in a terrorist attack last year. Immediately, the governments of the West, the mainstream media in the West, pointed the finger at Russia and said, the Russians did it, which was clearly nonsense. I mean, that didn't make any sense whatsoever because they were Russian pipelines. They were owned by Gazprom. Russia put the money in, $35 billion, to build these pipelines. They were going to get loads of money back by selling oil to, not oil, but selling gas, natural gas to Germany and other countries on an ongoing basis. So they would have recovered their investment and made lots of profits over the years to come. So it didn't make any sense whatsoever that it was the Russians that did that. Then it was investigated, and I think by the Swedes and the Danes, because the pipelines crossed their sea territory. And they said, well, we're not going to tell you the results of what we found because they're sensitive. So that obviously points to the USA having done it. And then a few weeks ago, there was the bombshell report by Hirsch Seymour, the very, very respected investigative journalist, who showed that it was the US government going right up to Biden with the aid of the Norwegians who sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines. Now, of course, America denied that. The Biden regime denied that. Now, they're coming out and they're pointing the finger at pro-Ukrainian groups. So after a year and a bit more of backing the Zelensky regime and everything to do with it to the absolute hilt, pumping money in there, much of it's getting laundered back to the politicians in America, of course, but pumping in weapons there, so much so that the weapon arsenals of NATO countries are being run down and depleted, leaving NATO countries dangerously exposed if there should ever be an actual threat to NATO territory, rather than this conflict in Ukraine, which is about the Donbass and ethnic Russians in the Donbass. So after a year and a bit of doing this, they're turning around and saying, it was Ukrainian groups that sabotaged Nord Stream. We're wiping our hands of this and blaming you. Now, the thing is, it's very, very ironic, this headline, because it says a pro-Ukrainian group. Well, that could actually mean anything. Now, the hints in there, of course, your immediate takeaway from that is that it's someone in the Ukrainian government. It's someone, in the Zelensky regime or from Ukraine that that carried out the sabotage. But actually, a pro-Ukrainian group could be the US government under Biden. It could have been, sadly and terribly for me, the UK government under Johnson. Now, Hirsch Seymour didn't point the finger at the UK, he pointed the finger at the USA and Norway. But of course, they are, you could say, they are a pro-Ukrainian group within the US government that did this. So it all actually goes together. Almost perhaps, subconsciously, psychologically, admitting that it was them because they've been supporting the Ukraine in the conflict and against Russia's special military operation. And instead of de-escalating so they could all have been over in a couple of months or never happened at all in the first place, they've been escalating until we're at the brink of escalating into something which could destroy everything. And we certainly don't want World War III to start to happen. But there's some of these people are so gung ho, it's almost like they don't care. They would start it anyway. Um, so very, very interesting that this has come out now. But the timing also is very, very interesting, because in the special military operation in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass area, for about 6 months, the Wagner group, which is intimately connected with the Russian army, has been pushing to take the key strategic city of Bakhmut, which sits on a crossroads. It's one of the most heavily fortified and defended cities on the front line in the Donbass, and they have now encircled it. They haven't closed the gap totally, but they have tactical and operational encirclement of that city. And when that city falls, then the advance of the Russian army is going to just go far, far more quickly as they push into Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, the last big remaining cities in the Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts, and then can push over basically open countryside right up to the Dnieper River and Kiev itself. That will go far, far more quickly when Bakhmut has fallen. So it's about to fall completely. It's about to be completely occupied by the Russian forces, who are trying to stop the ethnic genocide of Russians in the Donbass area by Zelensky regime forces and National Socialist battalions attached to it, as it's been going on for 8 years. They're about to do that. And just at this time, so the people who are the top brass in NATO, the top brass in the Biden regime, who've been pushing for more escalation, more escalation, more escalation for a year, have realized it hasn't worked. They put sanctions on Russia to begin with. And Liz Truss, who was the Foreign Secretary of the UK at the time, said this is going to cripple the Russian economy. That's what they wanted to do. They actually genuinely wanted to destroy the Russian economy so that it would lose. They actually genuinely thought NATO would win this conflict very, very quickly. Then they could effect regime change in Russia, split it up and pillage their resources, as they've done so many other places, which is not the right future for the world. The right future for the world is that we trade and make friends with people. We can't make friends with every country in every place, but we can be civil and trade. But they've chosen the wrong future. They thought that their plans were going to work and they were going to just win this very, very quickly. They didn't. And the Russian army's been advancing, and they're now going to take Bakhmut very, very soon. Terrible, terrible losses of life, and the poor young Ukrainian men who are not National Socialists but have been forced by press gangs to go to the front line are paying the price, because they're being slaughtered by the thousands every week. It's an absolute appalling situation. And this is going on, this war of attrition is going on because of the intransigence of the deep state elites in the Western military industrial complex, who do not represent the people, by the way. The people do not want this war to go on and continue. We want an end to it. We want to stop to the slaughter, and we just want to get back to normal. We reject the insanity of the net zero policies, which say that we're going to diverge from gas and oil anyway and put up wind turbines and solar panels. So we don't need Russian gas because we don't need gas. Well, we do, because if we don't continue to use oil and gas and coal until there is a viable alternative that's not wind and solar, they're not viable. Obviously, nuclear is viable for electricity, but you still need something that you can combust to give you instant thermal energy in a lot of the industrial processes that need that. So, we're not going to be able to diverge from coal or oil and gas for a very long time. So, we still need to do that. But this is what the Western elites are wanting to do. And, part of this plan there is sort of being carried out in Ukraine and so on, and also with the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines. But their plans have failed. So, so this is going on. So it's very interesting that the US deep state is now pointing the finger at Ukraine because they realize that it's gone belly up, as they say. You know, their operation, their plans to keep pumping money and weapons to Ukraine to defeat the Russians, as they say, whatever that means, pushing them, all the ethnic Russians, out of Ukraine, perhaps. That's what they mean, pushing them back to Russia. That's essentially what that sort of means, some kind of ethnic cleansing, I imagine. But that hasn't worked, and the opposite has happened. They realize Bakhmut is about to fall. They realize this is a complete turning point in the conflict, and Russia is about to start making big sweeping gains, and that's going to look really, really bad for them, who have pushed, pumped tens of billions of pounds and dollars and euros into Ukraine, and people are already absolutely up in arms about this in the West. So why are you wasting all of this money on a completely unnecessary conflict when we have a huge national debt? You're not spending money on improving the lives and the lot of local people in the UK, in the USA, in European countries. You're actually making life worse for your own citizens. But then you're pumping billions and billions of pounds to Ukraine, running down our own armed forces and their arsenals, and sending all the weapons to Ukraine to get used up and destroyed. Why are you doing this? This is going to look really bad for them when more and more people, the majority of people, wake up to the absolute disaster this has been for the West under the leaders that we've got, who have gone down the wrong course of escalating conflict rather than de-escalating, sitting around the table, coming to a civil conclusion, which could have easily been done. And then we could have had a different future than we have now. We can still get back to that, but it's going to take a lot more time than it will do now, because of the poor, absolutely awful decisions of the leaders we have in NATO countries and in the West. So it's interesting because they're now pointing the finger at Ukraine because they realise they have messed up really, really badly, and things haven't gone according to how they thought they were going to go in Ukraine. The biolabs that in Ukraine have been exposed, the money laundering's been exposed, the corruption's been exposed, the National Socialism infesting the country has been exposed. It's all been exposed by this special military operation. And so, the best thing that will happen is that the corrupt people who are in governments in the Western countries will fall, and we can put people in government who will not destroy the world, essentially, which is what they're doing. So this is a narrative collapse. It's a panic reaction. It shows that they realize that their plans are falling apart. Hopefully, this will be the start of bringing the conflict and the terrible slaughter that's going on in Ukraine to a close, and we can actually start to de-escalate, which is what we should have been doing a year ago.